beginning. This is J.C. Watson from the Planner for the Hawaii Invasive Species Council, presenting at the number 6 presentation of the Hawaii Invasive Species Council Brown Bag Series. Today I'm going to be presenting on the Micronesia Regional Invasive Species Council meeting, which was held last month in Guam. So let's get started. So first off, what is RISC? That stands for the Micronesia Regional Invasive Species Council. And basically their mission is to prevent the introduction of invasive species across the Micronesian region, as well as reduce the population of existing invasive species, and when feasible, conduct eradication events through coordinated efforts throughout the jurisdiction. So at the meeting, there was a number of jurisdictions that were represented. About half of them were not able to attend, but there was people from Guam, Hawaii, the U.S. Forest Service, Palau, Yap, and I forget I think the last one, but it'll be in there as I present potentially. Yeah, maybe it was Saipan. Thanks, Randy. So the RISC meeting happens annually, and it provides an opportunity for the various jurisdictions to share invasive species updates and knowledge with partners throughout the Pacific, as well as kind of be a coordinating location and kind of where the various jurisdictions can get together and discuss how to move forward as a region. It was held in Guam on the 27th and 28th of last month. As I said before, multiple jurisdictions were in attendance. They gave individual country updates, and then a large portion of this meeting was dedicated to drafting a communique and presentation to the Micronesia Island Forum, which is a large-scale gathering of the leaders of the various jurisdictions within Micronesia, and they get together and have decision-making that happens. So at this meeting, we prepared the communique, which is a kind of a consolidated voice of the RISC to the myth. Basically, I'm going to go through the accomplishments now of the various jurisdictions. From this point until kind of a little bit later, I've actually duplicated the exact presentation that the RISC gave to the myth. So you'll be able to see pretty much exactly what was put together and what was presented to the leaders of Micronesia. So
yeah, I don't know if I don't think you mentioned that the myth is what they're now calling what used to be the Micronesian Chief Executive Summit. So it's actually the presidents or chief executives of all those Micronesian jurisdictions that are being presented to. So it's a pretty high level event.
Yeah, thanks. So first up, the Federated States of Micronesia president signed biosecurity law into effect on April 28, 2017. So that was right before this meeting actually happened. It was very hot off the press. I think we were reading news releases as we were in the meeting and getting all excited about it. The Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands Invasive Species Council was created, which is awesome. There's kind of a coordinating group now there in the Northern Marianas that can spearhead invasive species efforts. And they also finalized their action plan. RMI, what does that stand for again?
Republic of the Marshall Islands.
Thank you. The Republic of the Marshall Islands conducted new pest surveys, as well as early detection monitoring for coconut rhinoceros beetle. Pohnpei State Invasive Species Council drafted, the Pohnpei State drafted legislation dedicated to invasive species, and they conducted outreach on the black sock disease, which is killing breadfruit within the region, and that was very important to be presented to the myth because in Micronesia, like throughout the Pacific, breadfruit is a staple food crop. So the fact that there's a disease out there that's causing widespread mortality is of concern. News into Kosrae, they brought the coconut termite under control. I did ask about what that means under control, and they're bringing it down to almost undetectable levels, which is really cool. And they're also surviving the blackstock disease, which is killing the breadfruit, as I mentioned, but in Kosrae it's also threatening their endemic Terminalia trees, which is an important cultural and forestry tree.
Do you know what they're doing for coconut termite control? Is it chemical treatment?
I'm not sure. I can try to look through. They didn't, at this meeting, they weren't as, I guess, open with all of the various updates. A lot of them were just paper.
Yep.
So I wasn't provided with an electronic copy of that, but I can try to look through. I do have the papers at my desk. I can try to look through that and see if I can find out exactly what they were doing.
So it's really the identical disease that's killing?
Yeah, so both Kosrae and Pompeii have blackstock disease for breadfruit, but then that same disease is impacting the Terminalia trees. Really awesome news from YAP. They're on track to complete 2 eradications. One is the chain of love vine and Emperata grass, so they estimate that they will achieve eradication of both of those species in 2018.
The chain of love, that's Mycania and Micronesia?
No. I think they call it, over here they might call it Mexican creeper. Yeah, it's a vine that is covered in pink flowers. Now on to Palau. They drafted new aquatic biosecurity regulations, which are ready for adoption by the Palauan government. And also a lady from Island Conservation who's based in Palau was there, and she was happy to announce that they completed a rat eradication on one of the rock islands. The rock islands are a small grouping of islets off the coast of Palau somewhere, but on one of them they were able to eradicate rodents, which is pretty great.
Yeah, they're pretty small but tall limestone islands, but I don't think any of them is particularly large in terms of acreage. Good.
On to Hawaii. I was happy to announce that we completed our Interagency Biosecurity Plan. I gave a pretty detailed briefing on what that is and how it is potentially going to impact us and move biosecurity forward in the coming years. I also provided them with executive summaries as well as a link to the plan in its entirety. And then I presented on the new airports monitoring program, a project known as Mamalu Poi Poi. They were very excited to hear about that as well. As for Guam itself, they completed their interim invasive species management plan, and they initiated a control program for feral swine.
You know what that control plan looks like?
I do not. That was about as in-depth as they went. Like,
yeah.
We have a plan for feral pigs.
Okay.
I assume it entitles some level of control and trapping, and probably working with local subsistence hunters to a degree. And then at one of it was kind of a breakout meeting where the folks from the Micronesia Challenge came in, and there was a discussion, and basically RISC is going to work with them, the measures group of the Micronesia Challenge, to develop capacity building projects that enable each jurisdiction to conduct baseline surveys for invasive plants. And as part of that, that's actually really neat, because then that allows each jurisdiction to have data that's comparable to that of other jurisdictions. So when they go in for new funding requests or start to compare data and results, they have identical data and methodologies for collecting it. And that's something that has not been done in the past, and there was a lot of talk in this meeting prior to the Micronesian Challenge folks coming in on, how do we convince each of these jurisdictions to collect the same data, because they all want to do it their own way, and they all have been doing it their own way up until this point. So they were expecting a little bit of resistance from the MC folks, but they were very, very accommodating, and were very happy to do they commit to doing the same protocols as everyone else. and those protocols were developed by RISC. And if anyone is interested in them, please let me know, and I can get you those protocols. So then there was 4 issues which require action, which were presented to the NIST. The first one was the need for a regional coordinator. This single person would be most likely located on Guam, but would help to spearhead the regional biosecurity plan implementation throughout the region. They would develop, and they would need to develop future funding for their position and grant proposals. This is a position they've been proposing for a number of years, as I understand it, and they've had some level of commitment throughout the jurisdictions on funding, but by presenting this at the MIF, they're hoping to get a financial commitment from each of the jurisdictions to kick in $20,000 in FY each, $3,000 annually thereafter. Up until this point, there had been a commitment for, I believe, $10,000 per jurisdiction per year, but due to whatever reasons, none of the jurisdictions actually ponied up the cash. So they're hoping to get this regional coordinator position funded soon, and that would really, really help with moving the region forward in a unified fight against invasive species and with biosecurity as well. They presented on the need to continue to collaborate with the U.S. and federal agencies. The new U.S. Interagency Task Force was established by a recent executive order to promote agriculture and rural prosperity. Bill Andriozzi was presenting on that, and that it's one of, what was it? Yeah, it's some task force that President Trump actually put forward, I believe. And it was, it's kind of vague in what it does, but basically what they want from the MIF is to just continue to speak with the U.S., especially with the territories, Guam being the main one, because they would be potentially capable of being a recipient of any aid that would come in for increasing agricultural and rural prosperity. The RISC also requested a letter from the MIF to the U.S. Secretary to express interest in working with this new task force on invasive species concerns in Micronesia. Then there was some coconut rhinoceros beetle updates. As many people know, CRB is devastating coconut trees in Guam, Palau, and other Pacific islands, including Hawaii. And within the region of Micronesia, there's a high risk of spread, and so far there's no effective control, especially of the type 2 genotype, which infests Guam and Hawaii. There are actually 2 genotypes of CRB. There's the regular type and type G. The regular type is affected by a naturally occurring virus that has been spread throughout the Pacific in during biocontrol efforts. Unfortunately, type G is unaffected by this virus. And there's been minimal success with the larva fungal pathogen as well in Guam and getting it established. So a regional project is urgently needed to develop effective biocontrols, and they were really putting the call out to the region and the scientists there that there needs to be an effective biocontrol agent established for this type G specifically. And the RISC requested support from the MIF leaders on such a project. So one of the big things in Guam they found is that, and they do this here too in Hawaii potentially, but in areas that are highly invaded by CRB, they can get into the Home Depots and the Lowe's, and they will actually infest the potting soil. So what you see here is the telltale marks of a CRB chewing through a bag of potting soil, and they'll kind of turn around and insert the eggs within the soil, and then this makes it a perfect transport media to other islands. You can see all the grubs that can be found in a bag of soil. This photo was taken from one of the jurisdictions where there is not CRB, and there was basically what happened, this was right before I got there, what happened was a gentleman from one of the jurisdictions bought a bag of potting soil, put it in his luggage, because it is illegal to ship potting soil per island throughout the region commercially, but that doesn't stop people from buying a bag and putting it in their luggage. And then when he got to his home island, he opened it up, and it was filled with coconut rhinoceros beetle larvae. Fortunately, they were able to, he reported it, and they were able to intercept this bag of soil. But for everyone you intercept, how many go through unnoticed is the question. So one of the big things that the RISC wanted the MIF to do is ban shipments of all soil from Guam throughout the region. And that is really tricky because you can't ban a single one, as each jurisdiction is, I guess, governed in a different way, and they're kind of sovereign countries. So it really comes down to each individual country and jurisdiction putting their own regulations in place, as opposed to Guam putting one in place saying we won't ship to anyone else. But that's what's up with the CRB. So the Office of Island Affairs created the Territorial Invasive Species Coordinating Committee, which also includes Guam, CNMI, American Samoa, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. And this is kind of a duplicating of invasive species efforts within the region. So the RISC recommended to the MIF to maximize the effectiveness and basically join both of them together so they can have coordinated meetings and, yeah, basically to kind of stop redundancy and have coordinated meetings. And they wanted the MIF to support that in the form of a letter to the OIA. So we're getting kind of towards the end. This is a relatively quick brown bag, but when I was in Guam, I did have the opportunity to participate in brown tree snake detection surveys. And these are, depending on the location you're going, they can vary from, a couple hours to all night. But basically what it is you use a vehicle-mounted spotlight, and one of the easiest places to find snakes is along fence lines. And though Guam is completely infested with snakes, they still continue to patrol these fence lines along ports of entry, such as this fence here was around the post office. They patrol the ones around the military bases, airports, and shipping ports and stuff like that. So there's not actually a snake in the photo on the left, but there is a snake head on the photo on the right. There's still a snake attached to it, but you can't.
What were you looking at? Is that somebody's elbow?
That's someone's hand and thumb.
A small snake.
Yeah, that was a relatively small snake, but they're long and thin. But this is basically what you see when you drive around in the car. You just go slow, and the driver both drives and controls the spotlight. And the juvenile snakes, after dark, really are attracted to the fence lines because of the large number of insects and geckos that use them in the night.
JC, not to cut into, and one of the things about the snakes is that they are getting smaller in size because the prey base there now isn't as big, and so they're having a hard time sourcing bigger prey items.
That makes sense. So just a couple photos of the coconut rhinoceros beetle damage, and then I'll get into a couple of their kind of control methods that they're trying to work on. So the photo on the left, you can actually see that one palm tree is looking pretty bad, and the two right behind it are nothing but trunks. So this is the type of damage that we could potentially expect in Hawaii, since we do have that type G, as compared to when I went to Western Samoa last year, and they have widespread CRB, but it was not nearly as bad. There was occasional damage, but I didn't see any tree mortality due to the CRB in Samoa versus widespread mortality and widespread damage in Guam. So the main thing that they are trying to do in Guam to control coconut rhinoceros beetle is management of breeding sites. And one of the most successful things they use is tekken netting. And this is just an example pile there at the university where you can pile the green debris and cover it in netting, and the coconut rhinoceros beetle adult get entangled both as they fly in and as they emerge if eggs are laid within the pile. And they get really stuck. It gets, they kind of push their head through and it gets stuck over the thorax, in between the thorax and the abdomen, and then they die. Another thing that I learned about there is that Guam has, which was incredibly kind of eye-opening for me and scary because we have so much commerce with Guam, is the greater banded hornet, which is a relatively new introduction there. It's absolutely huge, 1 to 2 inches in size. They're highly aggressive, and they prey upon insects, so they can take everything from small insects to honeybees. So that's a really bad one that we want to be on the lookout for here. And I had actually, during my kind of a little bit of research on this, I watched a rescue operation of someone. I think it was a dog who had fallen down a cliff in Guam, and the rescuers actually accidentally repelled through a wasp nest, and it was incredibly bad, and they were hospitalized. A number of the rescuers were. So it's definitely something that we don't want in Hawaii.
It's from Japan?
I'm not. I think this one is from Southeast Asia. There is another incredibly large hornet,
Japanese hornet as well,
species in Japan, and we don't want that one either.
This one, how bad is the distribution in Guam? Never really heard about it.
From what I could find in the research I did, they barely touched on it. They have control of the known populations, but because they were kind of widespread in between, they expect that there are some wild populations that they haven't found yet. So they're keeping their eyes open, and they're trying diligently not to let it get to high densities. And that's actually it. This is just a photo of the Lati stones, which is a cultural icon there in Guam. So if anybody has any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. And if you want to get a copy of the Invasive Species Survey Protocols or a scanned copy of any of the individual island or jurisdictions updates, please send me an email, and I'd be happy to provide them to you.